G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talk Stuff Ukraine War Update for the 1st of March 2026. Now before I talk about Ukraine, there was a strike, I believe it was 10 hours ago now, and in the meantime there's been retaliatory attacks. The news is not clear on what's happened. Now, there is apparently claims that Iran was going to give up nuclear weapons. President Trump already had set the deadline. But I am not an expert on Iran. So I can't tell you what the Ayatollah was thinking. I can't tell you what the envoys were thinking. So I don't know why Trump pulled the trigger on Iran, but he did. Now, he claims the leadership was not serious. Russia is accusing America of not waiting, pointing to their own strategic patience with Ukraine before pulling the trigger on Ukraine. Now, Russia has maintained Ukraine broke an agreement and is now claiming they're breaking another. They said that America did not give Iran time to break agreement, but Iran has broken many agreements already. Now, that is not a yes or no to war. This is whether or not people think Israel pushed America to attack Iran. We'll never know. We'll never know the truth. You will always make up your mind how you perceive the US-Israeli relationship, no matter how complex it is. There is no denying that big nations use small nations as cat's paws. There is no denying that big nations are attacked by small nations, I would not say on a regular basis, but routinely enough that every few years there is a conflict around the globe. And there are ongoing conflicts around the globe. I would say Iran is an ongoing conflict. Korea is a stalled conflict. Ukraine is a renewal of an older conflict in which Ukraine will never admit they're in the wrong. Iran will never admit the truth. I do think the US preemptive strike on Iran, if it is declared to be a preemptive strike, because now some people say it's defensive, and I don't. And yes, Iran was using militias in several countries to attack US and Israeli interests, and those were denied by Iran. So you're always going to get somebody can point to an article and say, but Iran was cooperating. You can always point to an article and find where Iran wasn't cooperating. It's like Ukraine. If you look hard enough and you are willing to abandon your bias and abandon your predetermined decision of support and not immediately react to every piece of news, because I am trying to bring you unbiased, unfiltered truth. Now, it would take me weeks to give you a proper comment on Iran, because I would have to catch up on everything Iran was doing. The media is not helpful. The media is against Trump. You think you're going to find an honest article that said Trump was right? How long does it take on the previous Iran strike before you had the Obama officials admitting Trump was right, that Iran had nuclear material under the mountain? That this was a previously undeclared base in the joint... He declared the Europe ages ago. Europe was hostile to the United States, even to Obama. You may not want to admit it, but when it came to Iran, Europe was against Obama. And even Obama wanted an Iranian deal, but he didn't want one as blindly as Europe. But he went along with it against his better judgment And he regretted it. But then, of course, he did it anyway. That's the issue. That's the problem with Democrats, is they will go along, right? They will immediately transform. They do not have a set policy other than we will obey the global order. And that is marching America towards submission to a conglomerate. It's not just Russia, it's a conglomerate, right, of India, China, Russia, who already have subjugated Europe into some, I wouldn't say completely, it's a quasi, where right now Europe is trying to buck China but not appease America. They are trying to use China as strategic leverage against America. This is what idiots do every day. They always have. That's why we keep hearing about trade deals all the time. You think once we make a trade deal, it's forever? No! Trade deals get ended within days, if not years, or once off. How long has the North American trade deal been hanging around, and most of it is unimplemented or still hidden from public view? What wages in Mexico still suppressed by the Mexican government? Heck, the Mexican union suppressed wages in Mexico. When Mexican workers were expecting pay rise after pay rise. But what happens? They hit with devaluations. They fail to meet economic targets. They fail to reduce crime, which further reduces tourism, which further weakens the peso. And Mexico, every 30 years goes through economic cycles where they end up back where they started. Same with Iran. But this time is different. Iran is desperate for US money. But Iran is too proud. And it is a illegal, occupying colonial government that has broken free of its colonial era of the caliphate, but it's still the caliphate. It's just broken free of Saudi Arabian control. Saudi Arabia, through its ties with the New York Times and other articles and other organizations, are trying to get you to not support the US and Iran, but at the same time not support the government, not support Iran's foreign interests. So it's a duopoly, a complete hypocrisy, but it's a complex foreign policy where as long as Iranian troops don't leave Iran, they're the good guys. They're the Islamic brothers. But it's the militias and the terrorists they support that's the bad guys. Saudi Arabia only wants you to weaken Iran, to keep them contained, and pick off one by one, not all at once or not permanently, get rid of Iranian militias outside of Iran. They want the constant threat to keep you protecting them. So they do not want Iran to fall. So every time Iran is close to falling, Saudi Arabia bails them out, tells you you're the bad guys, and then it's business as usual. You go back to fly swatting the little guys. Now, for Pakistan, another war, I could cover a dozen wars. I could make videos every day going on and on about different wars. Ultimately, right, I may soon stop making these videos and solely focus on other red pill issues. These videos are not popular. They have less engagement now than a year ago. But this is not set in stone. I believe I should rightfully cover the war to the end. I've lost so many videos. I've upset so many people. And honestly, if you get upset over my videos, right, these so-called friends and these so-called writing groups that are oh Dave, we love you, you're an amazing writer. And then 5 minutes later, we hate your videos on you, sloppy Ukrainian forever. Anybody who cannot fathom that Ukraine is not the good guys, that Ukraine is a dictatorship, is a goddamn fucking socialist muppet. There's my F-bomb. I'm trying not to do it. I'm trying to be consciously aware I do it and cut back because it seems to offend too many people. I seem to offend too many people. Right? I cannot be brutally honest because then it seems to offend too many people. I have to decide. And I cannot appeal to the mass audience. Because that means licking Ukraine's boots. Now, Ukraine recently claimed they made favourable gains in southern Ukraine. Without any evidence, people believed them. I bring you evidence that their offensive failed before it even began. Right? They're claiming to have crossed, they have claimed to have regained territory at Kherson. Right? This is open ground. Right? The Russians are not sitting on the riverbank everywhere, every day. They're actually, right? The Ukrainians can and have tried to cross the river, right? But I'm telling you now, they're dead. Right? The Russians, right, have halted them. Where's the Ukrainian army? Where's the offensive? Where's the battle reports? Where's their gloating? No. Al Jazeera preemptively published an article no one else published, no one else reported on, not even the Russians reported on it. This happens every day, right? Preemptive strikes by the media to be first. They hear about a Ukrainian offensive. They write a glorious boot-licking article, right, about a Ukrainian victory, and it never comes. They crossed the river and died. Didn't even make the markers on their own maps. Did not make their Kyiv news. Did not make any impact on the war whatsoever. If Ukraine had made huge gains, it would be all over, right? It would be all over the media. Iran, now, of course, Zelensky is saying that, nothing on Iran. So, but he's saying that, but he is indirectly saying that events elsewhere, it's important to remember Ukraine, and that events elsewhere cannot take away from our glorious defense and our glorious victory. And that soon we'll be marching on Moscow. Yes, Adolf. Yes, yes, take it, Bill. Right, you're going to drop 10,000 bombs for every bomb that dropped on Kyiv. Yes. You're going to bomb Moscow for every bomb, 10,000 times for every bomb. You're going to kill 50,000 orcs and for every dead Ukrainian civilian, and you're going to march to victory, and you're going to be standing in a statue in Freedom Square and all these other glorious self-congratulatory. That's why it's so hard to be objective, because Zelensky just makes it so fun to mock. It's just so fun to mock the little man who sounds like the little mustache man. Now, as you can see, the Ukrainians actually marked off where there was attacks on the docks, attacks on air defences, attacks on power grid in Odessa. Right. There were air defence alerts, but they only mark off 2. Right, they don't mark off any of the others. But Ukrainian positions were hit. Sumy, Kharkiv, like almost every day. Well, these are often retaliations. Right. The explosions in Belgrade 2 days ago. A day later, Kharkiv is hit. And then Ukraine says, we're going to retaliate to Russia's attacks. Just like Iran. They will ignore everything they've done and say the US attacked us. And never mention how they attacked shipping in Yemen. That's why the US was struck. That Iran, had resumed, the Yemenis have resumed attacking ships in right? They resumed rearming the Yemen. Right? There was no threat from Saudi Arabia, because the Saudis cannot. The Saudis are fuming, and the reason why they lost is instead of buying US weapons, Saudi Arabia went cheap, bought some Chinese weapons, right? So they went in with their Timu tanks into mountains, right? What are tanks in mountain passes? Targets, right? They got grenade swarmed, right? Drone swarmed. They're not prepared for modern warfare, just like unlike Ukraine, right? Ukraine was prepared for 10 years to go to war against Russia. They were being prepped to launch World War III. Russia engaged in a preemptive strike. That, of course, is the same thing the US did in Iran. Now, it's the same thing, almost, what the Chinese did with their proxies in Cambodia. Right? Except the Cambodians were not defending China. Were defending Chinese criminals in a Chinese scam call center, which was operating primarily with slave labour, right? And the Thais were going to creep across the border and rescue some Thai people, and instead of running away, the gangs ambushed and set off a series of battles there, which are still going tit for tat every couple of weeks, right? There's another tit for tat, right? There's going to be tit for tats going on in Cambodia, right? Tourists are told not to go there. They go there anyway. Every year, couple disappear to the organ black market. People get told that Middle East is unsafe, yet women go there every year and they disappear because they can't be told. Right? So it's like all these people who support Ukraine. They're all people who can't be told. They have to learn for themselves. And then so far they haven't learned a single lesson in four years of saying we're winning. So how can you... Right, you just cannot save people. That's the lesson I'm learning. You cannot save people. People who want to be saved will come to you to be saved. Right? We have never saved the heathen, ever. We can talk till we're blue in the face, but something will happen to them, then they'll look at information. So yes, it is still worth trying, but I'm just saying, you're not going to save many people, right? Most people don't want to be saved. Most people want to be told they're good, even when they're the most nastiest of people. Most people are trying to protect their reputation rather than be good. Most people are ruthless and hypocrites and just looking to get over on you. Kupiansk is a strange situation because I'm pretty sure, although checking Russian Telegram, pretty sure there was something mentioned. Now I'm going to check Russian Telegram. Telegram's unreliable anyway, but it's supposed to be an official Ministry of Defense. Yeah, a crew of an AGS-12 automatic grenade launcher in Dnieper forces in the Zaporozhye region provided continuous fire support in Kherson. Operational tactical drones attacked Ukraine in 149 areas. Where's the 149 drone attacks on this map? Drone snipers, mortar crews, repair groups in action. According to this, Russian troops liberated Nenishki in Kharkiv. Lancet mortaring crew took out the enemy, tried to cross it in Krasny Lyman. Enemy UAVs taken out in Kharkiv. No. Russian tanks, Russian artillery. According to this, units of the Guards Airborne at Yulovostok providing relay communications to forward units operating near Kharkov in southern Russia. Guruki, no, it wasn't Kharkiv. Zaporozhye. So Kharkiv was quiet. Kharkiv was hit. Kupiansk was quiet. Only a little bit of action. There was action here. But again, the Russians failed to take and hold ground. Now, allegedly, they hit the bridge here. But it hasn't been reported by the Ukrainians. And I think the bridge was only damaged and not destroyed. Now, according to the Russians, they've made progress, but it's not appearing on the map, though that is not uncommon. We see that operations are beginning back in Chavez Yar. This is after months of repairs to damaged vehicles and new artillery arriving. Right, now here, down here, somewhere, there's 3 units of new artillery that have arrived, but they might be replacing lost equipment because they had last year done the same thing, sent in 3 units of artillery. So when the Russians lose equipment, right, they take equipment, when Russians lose old equipment, they pick the new incoming, right, so they distribute the old equipment to us and then bring in those who are trained on the new equipment, and they reorganize every year. This also stops the Ukrainians from being able to infiltrate, and they try to guess. The idea is to confuse the enemy. So you can be talking about the Russian Marines, the Russian Guards, the Russian this, the Russian that, the motorized, the infantry, and they are all meaningless. Soldiers backed by artillery, sometimes mobile artillery, often D-30s. D-30s are being replaced, but at a slow rate, because there's 9,760 operational D-30s just in Russia. And then there's all those in Poland, and it's one of the most... but Russians are upgrading from the 105 to the 122. They're getting rid of their D-30s slowly. Now, it's going to take a long time, just like America's 155 took a long time and a lot of money. Now, M777, I believe, is for the is the current, and a lot of others are outgoing, but there is talk of the MX, which will be designated something else later, replacing all towed 155s. That's why they're headed to Europe. With US, for the US, it's going to be mobile artillery on the it's not the M1 chassis, it's going to be the M2 chassis. So the M1A1, M1A3 is, I think, the last M1. Although there is talk of an M1A5. No, I think the MX will eventually be the M2A1, and it will probably be one of the last things Trump rolls out. But we don't know, right? They rolled out the new Tomahawks, and Zelensky is salivating for those. Everything. Every time the US roll out new weapons, which ain't much, he expects them. It's just, he's become so pampered that he almost just wonders why, right? As soon as he hears the new weapons, he wonders why it hasn't been delivered. He keeps saying, oh, your commitment to us. You don't seem really committed to us. You haven't given us this, that, and the other. And it's like, well, what do you want next? A bloody battle fleet? And he goes, yeah, I'll take that. I don't want the Gerald Ford. I'll just take the Nimitz, you know. Doesn't understand proliferation of this war is the problem, right? Russia wouldn't have taken half this territory if Ukraine hadn't kept pushing, kept and they were winning. There's no doubt Ukraine had beaten back most of the rebels, right, who said they're only defending their home from Ukrainian secret police who were murdering Ukrainian ethnic Russians, right? These militias, backed by the Ukrainian government, were winning. Russia did send in troops, and that halted the Ukrainian army's advance. Then there was the series of accords. Now, they could have been fine, dandy, and just left it alone and lost only a small percentage of the countryside. Not even a significant percentage. But Ukraine cannot accept any loss of face. I forget what they call it right, you insult a Slav, it depends. If you're funny and it doesn't cut, right, call them a pig, whatever, usually just get a punch in the face. But it goes full on, right? They just never back down, never surrender, and right, never admit you're wrong. And like, that's why nobody likes them, right? Nobody likes the Poles. They don't want the Poles in Germany. They don't want the Poles in England. They want, the French, and they're idiotic, But now, right, they're really regretting. Eastern Europe is regretting, right? Eastern Europe is telling you, right? You're going to regret Ukraine. You're going to see them for what they are, and you're going to regret it, just like the Poles. Now, like I said so many times, the progress in sloppy Ukraine is sloppy. It's slow molasses, slowly leaking out of the barrel, slowly pouring over the map. The Russians, when they can't, gone around and they're now slowly coming in from this, right? They couldn't advance here, so they've advanced here, right? So they flanked the Ukrainians, right? That's the problem with digging in. You can get flanked unless you've got this is World War One, you have great lines of trenches and artillery so that you can't be flanked. This would be a stalemate if the Ukrainians didn't have so many open fields, all right, thinking that this is the fire-based mentality that failed in Vietnam, right? With Hitler's fortress cities, same mentality, dig in, right? But see, now and again, that has static defense worked in Bastogne, but it failed in most places. But it worked in Bastogne because the Germans ran out of fuel, not because the Americans' static defense. You watch anything on static defense, and it'll eventually, almost, right? Sieges end only when the enemy runs out of men and supply or patience. But when a city has no one to come to its rescue, it will eventually fall, just like Constantinople and others in the past all fell, right? That's why Vlad took his armies out of the city and went on the offensive, right? First, denying... actually, I'm not sure if it was Cossacks who taught him but retreat and leave nothing for the enemy. But and he went one further and impaled all his enemies. Now, if Ukraine is winning, they would not be handing over 1,000. They would be handing over 1,000 dead Russians, not 28, right? So we have offensive actions. We have not much territory gained, but it's static here, not by much, right? We'll see where these markers are often there so you can gauge the movement, right? Still there at Pavosk, right? Still making gains here and there, higgly-piggly. Right, got a little bit of gains here and there, but they can be attributed to just lines drawn on the map. Whoops. But there are areas, as you can see, where they made a few gains and then stopped. Haven't been able to push. Attacking Ukrainians, unable to push through. But they are still there, bombarding the Ukrainians. Right? Now, Russia almost had this, but the Ukrainians were able to push back. It's one of the few offensives where Ukraine is still not pushed back. Most of the 6 of the offensives in the last 6 months have failed. This is was it the 3rd or the 5th? Well, it's the only one that's we're still holding. Now, the Ukrainians are holding here, but as you can tell, the Russians are coming up on their flanks. They're holding here, but the Russians are spreading out. All right, they're hitting their reinforcements and resupplies. All right, they may be stopped here, but they're starting to fill in here. But the Ukrainians still hold. Ukrainians are still holding here. Ukrainians are holding here. Where they... Right, a little mini offensive again. Ukraine has stopped the Russians' halt, but the Russians are going around them. But they've stopped them at Zakrin. They've stopped them here. But for now, the Russians are hitting all over this Zaporozhye now. Now, there's quite a distance between Donetsk, and the Russians somewhere have operatives in this area, and they've admitted to it in this area, heading Kyiv. So these are operators for the Russian special forces are roaming the Zaporozhian countryside and the Russian aviation usually. Now they have a number of interesting glide bombs and drones that are making life miserable for the Ukrainians. But the Ukrainians haven't come up with anything new. It's Flamingo. It's just the V1. Nothing new. Now the Russians, Molva in action. The Russians, as I said, new artillery. Right. This is, yesterday I showed you the 122. This is the one. Yeah, let's look at the stats, shall we? I should have brought them up. Let's look at the stats. Molva. Well, you know, it's a 5-petaled pink flower. Someone did not tell them. Well, there you go. Russian artillery. Misinformation. Oh no. Molva artillery. Here you go. The 2S43 Molva. I think we looked at it before. It's the 152. As you can see, it's a big gun. Molva referring to the flower. This is the 152 Russian self-propelled gun on an 8x8 wheeled chassis. It is as heavy as a tank, bigger than a tank, has a 5-man crew, can fire up to 7 rounds, effective firing range of 24 kilometers or 50 plus with the M2 gun. The M2 is the M2 is the one with the gun hanging over the front, the big one. Alright, so you got the 2A64 or the 288. The 288 is the big boy, right? Diesel, good operational range, does have a hydraulic suspension, but that is not confirmed. But I think it did. They carry the 6.4 is the shorter barrel, and it has 30 rounds. Blah, blah, blah. And the 288 is heavier, bigger, longer barrel, longer range. New supplies, codename 44, began September 2004. Kharkiv. The previous version was in service already. As I said, the Russians don't develop one thing and then stop. They actually develop start with 3, then they eliminate the middle and put the middle to the technology to the top and the bottom end, right? So the technology in probably the technology was used to upgrade the 105 to the 122 and upgrade the 152 with a stronger, bigger, more. Like the stronger the barrel, the heavier it can fire, the heavier load it can fire, the more it can fire, the longer it can last in the battlefield before it's pulled back. Right? You may not realize this. Every time artillery is fired off, someone is counting. Right? Someone is doing a barrel check. They got barrel rams. Field barrel inspectors. Right? You have a long, complex history when it comes to artillery of making sure that when you put one up the spout, when you pull that trigger, it is not going to blow up on you. So the Mulva self-propelled gun in action. Now this we'll assume this is the 4.4, unless it says otherwise. As you can see, there it is. It has rounds loaded into the self-loader. Yeah, standard 152. But the new one, it's like a turret. That's the big boy, the 8.8, which is previously photograph unseen. Now, the 4.3 was withdrawn in December, replaced by the 4.4. Now, the 8.8 is coming into service. And she has a cope cage and a cam cover. It does come with the standard flash suppressor. There it is at Koshnikovia, showing you most of Koshnikovia is still pretty much intact. So that although the lower half is from that road, the lower half allegedly, parts of it is under Russian control, but only parts. As you can see, a lot of it is empty. There is no lights. It is a city under siege, pretty much only occupied by Ukrainian forces. There's you go. There's the new Mulva, in action. As you can see, it's a totally different gun design. So this is the 4.4, and there's the breach inspector. It's a clear window on the loader. Make sure that when there's some loading the loader, and there's the so while the loading, the gunner is calling in, checking the mechanism, and then let's see. Does she let loose? Yes, she lets loose. Let's see. There we go. That's how it looks. Boom. So that's how she. That's again how she looks undercover. So the men call in, an artillery strike, and there you go. See, systematic destruction. That's what Koshnikova looks like up close. So you can see artillery shells. Right, takes a couple to wipe out a house. They're not high explosive. They're high impact. Right. So this is the 4.4 being taken apart. There's the Slaker replacement as the bigger variant. So they got a couple of variants. That's what Russia does. They develop variants, they test them, and eventually they come down to, what's the easiest to make and make most of. And that is, of course, whether or not crew protection matters, sound, and other things. You may think you're protected, but you're not only locked up in with the gun. So, plus with cope cages and bigger loaders. The covered ones have a bigger loader, but yeah, you're not going to have the gunner sitting beside the gun in an enclosure. Alright, so you won't want to be on the wrong side of artillery. There's the end production model, I think, right, in battlefield testing. And it just shows you the low intensity. What could happen if Russia put thousands of these onto the battlefield of Ukraine. But obviously they are testing the new versions. And they are, there we go. So we're transforming over time, different models. Right. So obviously this is the older models. They're testing different designs on the cope cages, different designs on the turret and loader, and they're working to mass produce these. So which variant they go with matters, because eventually that's the one that will be the one they make thousands of. That's the current. There are different variants of the 44. There's the 43, 44, and other variants. Plus the variants also identify which army they're with. Right? The variants. Yeah. Now the thing that I think these already updated several times. The shoulder launch, they do starting to resemble. Yeah, but the Russia's air defenses, they have allegedly shot down the Flamingo long-range cruise missile and a number of unmanned aerial vehicles. Zelensky, of course, is when asked by the media in France, Russia accused France of UK and of sinking down Ukraine with a dirty bomb. Al Jazeera, I think, was the one who asked them and reported in Al Jazeera yesterday that he would accept a bomb. Russia protested. Ukraine denied they have tried to acquire a bomb. London and Paris have stubbornly kept silent about what they were doing. But Russia claims they have thwarted an attempt by British intelligence and their French counterparts to arm Ukraine secretly with a dirty bomb in order to create a nuclear disaster at Zaporozhye to get America's attention. Now, according to the Budapest Memorandum, Ukraine can acquire, now this is, lawyers have argued both sides of the argument, the non-proliferation treaty, that there was an agreement between the US and Russia to provide assistance to Ukraine for dismantling nuclear infrastructure and transferring warheads. Then they agreed to become in 1994 a non-nuclear state. There was a nuclear cooperation agreement for energy. The Australian uranium would be sold to Ukraine for energy, and the waste would be processed and inspected and sealed away in drums once it reached what they call the spent stage. So there would be no further enrichment or use for other areas. Now, according to some, Ukraine can turn around and say, well, Russia's broken the agreement by invading us, therefore we can get nuclear weapons. But it's the non-aggression treaty, right, that Russia claims that Ukraine has broken first, right, that Ukraine's aggressive stance and attacks on ethnic Russians was a violation of the agreement. Because the Budapest Memorandum is actually just a summary of all the other treaties. Okay, it's not, they just signed it to say, yeah, I understand this is the summary, right? It's a summary, it's not the whole thing. As far as I know, Ukraine is not legally allowed to have nuclear weapons. And that previously they have tried to use explosives and nuclear material in a so-called dirty bomb. Russia infamously was laughed at by the world, but showed off the fact they did seize a transportation. Now, it's believed that the Azov battalion, not the Ukrainian government, was behind an attempt to obtain a dirty bomb. And that Russia went into one of operation, losing hundreds of men in order to capture the device and bring it back to Russia, show it off, and then doesn't matter. Everything is memory hold. Nobody cares. Moving on. Russia demands the UK openly abandon its plans to transfer nuclear weapons to Ukraine. The UK, of course, is treating this as a joke. European Union responded by saying they'll accelerate the ascension. So they're literally so egotistical, they call it, you're ascending to EU membership. And like Turkey is upset. Like all these other countries who went through years of processes are all upset. But I think the reality is nobody will know the truth, right? Those who hate Russia are going to hate Russia and not believe Russia. This is the danger of ideological capture, right? If you allow yourself to be ideological captured, you'll be putting on blinders to your own side and saying, I support the death of Ayatollah Khomeini because he was a bad guy. And that's what, remember, US taking out Ayatollah is no different to Hillary Clinton taking out Saddam or Obama taking out Syria, though they failed to capitalize on that and left Syria in the dark ages for the next 10 years of fighting over who's the real leader, while the Syrian government held up pretty much holed up and controlled a third of the country, although they claimed 2/3, more like a third. They even lost control of their some of their airfields to rogues. Their military fractured. Their generals were bought off. Syria eventually succumbed, like all small nations, to the highest bidder. But the US could only control so much of the world financially before it's too complex. It's too many moving parts, too many warring factions. Look at Pakistan and India. They're grinding away at each other. Now, Pakistan is attacking Afghanistan, claiming that it's become a colony of India. This is the same thing that happened in Bangladesh, where they ousted the Bangladeshi because she was a Hindu. Even though the Muslims in Bangladesh hate each other, and they hate their own, the Islamic Party, because every time they're in power, they turn the clock back. And too many Muslims like the modern world. They like their modern comforts. They don't want the calls to prayers every day. They don't want the noise in the streets. They want Islam to go away and just be a quiet boys' club. But just like it is in Russia and other countries, you rarely see or hear from Muslims in some countries because they don't want to be Muslims. They just won't leave Islam while the terrorists are still at large. And yes, there is a widespread belief, particularly in Pakistan, that Imran Khan was removed because he was a secularist. Is that the correct term pronunciation? I believe so. The general who removed him, was now Field Marshal, I believe, had Chinese backing, though apparently now sucking back up to the US for money to fight Afghanistan. This is the same song and dance grift every few years. Now, in reality, is Afghanistan the graveyard of empires? Yes and no. It's just too far. Nothing of strategic value. People only go into, like the British only went into across the Khyber Pass because because they're sick of the cattle raids, right? The Afghans, they always hole up in their mountains. They've got plenty of caves to hide in. Just should have isolated them in the first place and just whittled them down over time. And would have won. But it was the gutless, the feckless. They kept undermining Trump. there wasn't the money or the public opinion. There wasn't enough. The Afghans were getting support from Pakistan attacking the supply lines. The Europeans were useless. They wouldn't stand up to Pakistan. The UK kept turning a blind eye, and so yeah. In reality, right, Pakistan only rules a couple of cities, and now very so often the military has to go into every region, and so every year people are dying. These countries are eventually going to kill themselves. They blame colonialism, but the reality is the real colonialism was, oh, British, we love you, now come fight our enemies for us. And then when the British create all the infrastructures, we rebel. So the British Empire, it was a huge mistake. The British realised it, unlike many others. But now, of course, the idiots, they just don't want to learn. They can't be told. They think bringing all these people in to be brutified will then expand and create the new British trading empire, right? And that Britain once again would be the trading centre of the world. No. Just like how Chicago wanted to be the trading centre of the world. Or no, you will not undermine the position. London is still an important city, but it is greatly diminished and is falling. And soon it will, like all failures to protect civilization, when you let the barbarians in the gate, it is no longer civilization. You do not civilize savages by letting them into your cities. Nor do you save America by retreating from... You retreated from... Once they drove you out of Baltimore, that was it. You just kept letting them do it, kept letting them come in. It's the same problems over and over again. The world just doesn't want to be told. They don't want to learn their lessons. Even I make mistakes and keep thinking. No. You're going to watch civilization collapse because there are too many people who are flat-headed, smooth-brained, and selfish. And they call themselves liberals or progressives, but they're just constant meddlers who want constant change for the sake of constant change. Now, thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and please support the channel. Support me on Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch, and when you ask any conservative, what have they conserved? Yeah, exactly. So, see you in the next... Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. See you in the next video, and bye for now.